glaciers, icebergs, chiseled snow-capped granite mountains soaring above the teal and electric blue lagoons. Bright red clusters of tubular flowers add delight along the trails, plus delicate white orchid patches that grace the grassy hillsides. How do these plants survive? They'll make that thrive in this harsh environment. Today, we're going to the ends of the earth, down to the tip of Chile and Argentina to explore magical Patagonia. If pressed, I would rate Patagonia as one of my top 5 adventures for sure, and likely in the top 3 of all the places I've been to for beauty, adventure, and excitement, and I'm closing in on 50 countries. Today, we're going to hike the W Trek to see the Torres del Paine and all around the base of Fitzroy, and we don't just hike, we bike and we paddle along some icebergs too. I cannot wait to share this adventure with you, so let's get started. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks. Today, like I said, we're going to head to the very, very tip of South America to one of the most beautiful places on Earth, Patagonia. Trekking Patagonia has been on my bucket list for many years, and finally it made it to the top of the list during my season-long exploration of South America and Antarctica last year. I have learned that, for me, it's smarter and more fun to go on a mountain adventure with small organized groups and a local guide, and particularly in this unfamiliar, often harsh territory, I thought it was even more important. So I chose to go with my affiliate, Active Adventures, because I knew I'd be guaranteed a great experience and they would make sure that I did more than hike. I knew they always put together some combination of hiking, biking, and paddling, usually with a slant towards hiking, and they would somehow throw in some fun paddling and biking opportunities as well, so I would get the complete Patagonia experience. And remember, since Active Adventures is one of my affiliates, they offer my listeners a $200 discount off of any of their worldwide tours, including their partner Austin Adventure Tours, with the exclusive promo code ATA200, ATA200. I'll put a link in the show notes, or you can always email me at kit@activetraveladventures.com to get the code. They won't let me put it on the website. So my 14-day Patagonia tour included visiting all the best highlights of both Chile and Argentina's Patagonia. So let's start with, where is it? If you picture South America, the part we're going to is that really skinny part down at the bottom tip. But we are truly going to the ends of the earth. I met my group in the city of Punta Arenas, the gateway city to Patagonia. This is the best airport to get to the area, and you generally fly in from Santiago, Chile. I happened to fly down here after my Peru adventure that I also took with Active Adventures that I did with my sister Terry, and I had a couple weeks to relax before meeting up with my group for this next adventure. I'm hoping that my daily long walks are going to keep me fit enough to do this Patagonian hike, because it is a little bit more challenging than some of their other adventures. The trip is rated a 3 out of 5 for difficulty level, and for the most part, I would say that's true. There's a couple of actually, maybe it's because we had to do a little detour that we had to do a steeper hike on the first. I'll get into this a little bit later. So that day was a bit more challenging than a 3, I would say, but certainly doable. The whole trip was doable, particularly if you train. And I'm always advocating that you go in well trained to any of these adventures, so you're focusing more on having fun than worrying about is your body going to handle it. So anyway, getting back to just talk about the trip itself, I was doing daily walks along the seashore just to try to keep up my aerobic activity and keep my muscles and legs in gear for now. I'm going to be hiking in the mountains once the group gets here. And I should say also about Punta Arenas, 2 weeks is way too long to stay in that town. I was able to get some work done on the show because after a couple of days, you pretty much see all you need to see in the town. And they did at the end of the trip actually throw in a walking tour of the city. But during my time down there, I got to learn a little bit about Patagonian life just as a regular tourist. And the first thing I noticed is that Chile does things a little bit different than Peru, and that the drivers stop for pedestrians. I wasn't used to that because you have to watch your life in the other countries a lot of times. Like I said, in Peru, you were a pedestrian at your own risk. You had to really watch. Here, the cars will screech to a halt to let you pass, even though they could clearly go in front of you without having to pause. It took me a while to trust them, which I'm sure they no doubt found annoying because I wanted to make absolutely sure they were going to stop, but they always did. Another thing I found interesting is the way that you would get a ticket for service at some places. For example, I wanted to mail some postcards. So when I entered the post office, there was a sitting area like you'd go into the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, with a multitude of people waiting in it. There's also a line, but not at the counters up front where presumably you get service in front of the little stations. But I figured, well, if the people on the line, I probably have to go on the line too. So I decided to go stand in the line. And when it was my turn, I confronted this machine that I had to tell my purpose for being there. And it could be to mail a package or a letter or to get money for, say, like a Western Union. So I tell the machine what I wanted and I printed out my ticket. And then I would look up at this electronic board for my ticket number and wait for that to flash. When that flashed, that would tell me which person to see at the front. And then I would then go to my appointed window. But apparently all those windows up front were just if you wanted to mail a package. So I get a thing telling me I got to go to a non-labeled counter in the back. And I found this ticketing system in pharmacies and other businesses. So if you are down in Patagonia, don't be surprised if when you walk in, you see a little ticket machine like you might see at the only time I think I've ever seen them in the U.S. really is in a fabric store when I was waiting for somebody to cut my fabric. So you go in, you grab the ticket, and then you wait your turn. I thought that was just a little interesting thing about the culture down there. So when I get back to the back thing, I show my unstamped postcards, and I'm trying to indicate that I want to mail them, and I get a funny look. So she takes my cards and then goes into the back room and then comes out and says 3,000 pesos. Now don't be scared. 1,000 pesos is about $1. So it's going to be about $3 to mail my 3 postcards. I found the whole thing a very interesting cultural experience that took me about 30 minutes to mail these 3 postcards. So I'm guessing bureaucracy is a big deal here. From there, I went to a pharmacy to see if I could buy some Dramamine for my Antarctica trip that was coming up. I saw that label machine, so I knew go get that ticket. And so like everybody else in the pharmacy, I'm waiting for my number to come up on the little marquee so I can pay for some lotion and to see if they have some Dramamine. I'm starting to get the hang of this ticket thing. Before I even headed down there, I really didn't know what to expect in Patagonia. I'd covered going on an adventure in Patagonia before, but it's a little bit different than, what do you expect when you go to a different country, particularly one that's so far away? And I was thinking it would be more backwards than it was, but it wasn't. I found 2 developed countries. Yes, there are some things that shows that it's not fully developed in that you can't flush the toilet paper down the toilet and often you can't drink the tap water. But other than that, you could be somewhere in the United States or Europe, but it had a South American flair. And a lot of times a European flair, depending on how it got colonized. Argentina and Chile are considered more developed than, say, Costa Rica. So you can use that as a comparison if you've been there. I certainly was expecting to see more of a developing rather than a developed nation. Now, don't get me wrong, they got their problems, and particularly in Argentina with inflation, which that'll work to your advantage. We'll talk about that in a little bit later. But it was a surprise to what I was expecting. One thing that was noticeable is that it seemed like everybody tried really hard to do a good job, no matter what their job was, how important or how relatively menial. They do it happily, with a conscientious effort and a smile. I loved the work ethic that I saw. The people are also very friendly and they're helpful. I was able to get along just fine with my butchered Spanish, but they speak a lot faster down there. And so my comprehension was much worse than in Peru, which I actually seemed to do pretty well in Peru, but I struggled a little bit. They also use a lot of local slang for which I'm completely unfamiliar. But if you speak any kind of Spanish, you're going to be able to get along fine. And most all the menus and the places that tourists go is going to have English underneath. So all you need to do is find a young person if you ever got confused and they can help you. And as usually they speak enough English to help guide you. And of course, if you use Google Translate or any of the apps, it's super easy to travel internationally now, even if you can't speak a word of the local language. Another thing I thought was very interesting while there is I rarely saw anyone beg. I saw 2 in an entire month, if memory serves, and both of them were older men. You might occasionally see somebody doing magic tricks for money or street musicians, but even that was rare. And unlike a lot of countries I've been to, they didn't have aggressive sellers like you would see in Peru or other countries. And I loved that I wasn't always having to reach into my pocket for tips like we had to do in Peru. In both Chile and Argentina, I always felt safe. Here's an important difference. Unlike many places around the world, while you can use credit cards down here, you usually have to pay the tips in cash unless you're in a better restaurant. And there's often a hefty credit card fee in addition to any fees your banks might charge you. So number one, I'd recommend bringing cash, US dollars in particular, nice, crisp, brand new looking bills, and converting it once here. And if you are going to use a credit card, make sure you use one like the Capital One with no foreign transaction fee. Check that because those fees can certainly add up. So in my starting city of Punta Arenas, which I found to be a nice enough town with a long, long walkway along the coast of the Magellan Strait, and after a couple days, I kind of established my walking routine. The city has some interesting sculptures along the shoreline and also in town, including the rusty hull remains of the ship Lord Lonsdale along the coastline. This hull acts as a tribute to the region's explorers and seems to be the emblem of the city, as there are modern replicas of that hull in white steel along some of the boardwalk. Just off the shore, abandoned docks are covered in cormorants. Those are those cool seabirds who air their open wings to dry. They're black and white down here, not the solid black like the ones I know. I'm going to see a lot of black and white critters down here, and it turns out to be by design for camouflage. The animals will be black on the top, so from the sky they'll blend in with the sea or land, but they're white in the belly, so from below, a seal or whale won't see them because they'll blend in with the sun. This helps to keep penguins among the other black and white animals safer from predators. On the night our tour starts, our group meets for the first time. Our Active Adventures guide is amicable and easygoing Jim, who is practically Chilean now, even though he moved here from Turkey decades ago. Other solo travelers include Sandy and Denise, sisters Betsy and Jody, friends Ken and Dan, and couple Janet and David. All are regular hikers, and we range in age from our late 50s to late 60s. I can already tell it's going to be a good group. We have a huge dinner, and like all active tours, I know we're going to eat really well on this trip. All meals are included as part of our tour, alcohol excluded. When in town, we eat at a restaurant and can choose what we'd like to eat. And when in the national parks, we eat at the refugios that have surprisingly good food and a fixed menu every day. We are never hungry, that's for sure. To give you an example, for dinner at our first refugio, we had salmon, potatoes, and veggies, all cooked to perfection. In this region, carne, or meat, is king. Fire-roasted lamb, beef, or guanaco, which is a tasty cousin of the llama and the camel, is the usual fare, although I do eat chicken a few times. If you are a vegetarian or have other dietary requirements, Active can accommodate you, but you must be sure to let them know in advance because coming down here on your own with those dietary requirements, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. After a big meal and a chance to get to know each other's stories, we hit the sack and get ready for our big adventure. In the morning, we head to the shore where we catch a boat that will take us to go see the penguins of Magdalena Island. Here we find an enormous penguin colony. The cute black and white birds are waddling to and from the shore to their permanent burrows. The male and female mates, and they mate for life, take turns heading to the sea to feed while their partner stays behind with the 1 or 2 eggs that they are incubating during this time of year. Penguins don't fly in the air, they can only fly in the sea. In addition to hundreds of penguins, there are multitudes of enormous seagulls, presumably hoping for an egg breakfast if they find a non-alert penguin. In a huge pile by the sea is a cluster of cormorants surrounded by what looked like a dried salt flat. But it's guano, or cormorant poo, which is so acidic nothing will grow there. Around here, the cormorants always seem to hang together, while usually back home I see them hanging out solo. While we thought seeing all the penguins was a thrill, our next stop to a sea lion colony actually was surprisingly more exciting for me. The huge dominant males were so loud. Most of us had seen sea lions before, but never so many in one place or making so much racket. It made quite the impression. This island nursery, where all the females are pregnant right now or will be giving birth soon, is surrounded by seaweed. This seaweed acts as a barrier and guard for the sea lions and penguins, as the whales can't swim past it. After our wildlife excursion, it's on to Puerto Natales, the gateway town to Torres del Paine National Park. This cute waterfront town boasts a lot of hip restaurants and breweries. We have an outstanding meal overlooking the waterfront. It's delightful Monumento al Viento, aka the Monument to the Wind, set up in honor of the city's 101st birthday in 2012. This dual sculpture features a man and a woman up in the air holding onto the pole for dear life, the pole being bent by the harsh winds notable in this region, all against a backdrop of glacier-top mountains in the distance. I'll put a picture on the website. It is quite striking. Belly's full, we head to bed so we can get up early to start the challenging, rated 4 out of 5, 43-mile W Trek, one of the most popular hikes in Torres del Paine. Torres del Paine gets its name for 3 massive tombstone-like towers that are believed to be the highest cliff faces in the world. Its name literally translates to Towers of Blue, Paine, which means blue in the indigenous language. The W Trek is a 4-day hike to see the park's most dramatic landscapes. We will sleep in well-appointed refugios, so we don't need to carry our food or our tent. This means most of our packs will weigh about 20 pounds. Water is regularly available, and around here is so pure that we don't need to treat it. There is a longer O Trek, which takes 9 days. It's a loop trek that includes the W Trek, plus goes around the back of the park and is walked counterclockwise, finishing with the W Trek. But to do the O Trek, you have to truly backpack, as I don't think there's refugios back there on that back loop part. But for us, we're going to get the gravy of seeing the best of the park without an overloaded pack. At our briefing before dinner, Jem and our 2 local guides, Karina and Hans, relay that, Houston, there's a problem. The park rangers are on strike for higher wages and better gear and have closed the trail to the base of the towers, the park's most popular hike. Jem and Karina suggest an alternative, 2 easier trails nearby that offer tons of beauty, wildflowers, and wildlife, including our best chance to see a puma or mountain lion. Compared to their second option, a trail to see the towers that's even harder and longer than the trail we're supposed to do, we can tell that the guides are hoping we'll choose the easier route. Remember, they have yet to assess our abilities, as we haven't been on a trail together, and they are looking at a bunch of middle-aged people. We take a vote, and it's 8 for the prettier, easier hike with one holdout, Ken, who says he flew all the way down here to see the towers, so he'd prefer the harder hike. The guides confer and decide we're going to do the harder hike. As it turns out, we are all glad for this decision. Inwardly, we find out later that we are each wondering if we could do the harder hike and didn't want to be the one to vote for it and then not be capable. But with the decision made for us, we're all excited for the challenge of the next day. I want to mention something I noticed in this incident, as well as in Peru with my sister Terry when something went wrong. Here, a big part of our W Trek was not going to be possible. Do you know how many complaints we got from the 9 of us? 0. I think it's because people who go on adventures learn how to adapt and become resilient. So this won't work. Don't complain. What will work? That's the attitude of people that go on adventure travels. I also saw this on the bus in Peru. It was already going to be our longest day on the bus, 12 hours straight, and we hadn't gone 5 when we come to a construction delay. I'm thinking 5 minutes, like I'm used to back home. But we're told, and remember, this is Peru, not on my Patagonia trip. It's just I want to relate the same kind of circumstances. So we're told that it's going to be a 2-hour delay before they can open the road up. I think it ended up being closer to 3 by the time it reopened. So our 1 p.m. lunch stop didn't happen until 5. There were about 40 people on that bus in Peru, most in their 20s and 30s. And how many moans did I hear? 0. Again, although young, these were seasoned adventurers who are accustomed to things not going according to plan, and they've learned to roll with the punches. It does wonders for keeping stress levels down and keeping the day pleasant. I strongly believe that adventure travel builds one's resilience bone. Can you imagine all the wailing and gnashing of teeth were this to happen on a bus full of typical 20-year-olds in the United States? The reason I do this show is to inspire and empower you to lead a bigger life through adventure travel. It is my firmest belief that going on these kinds of challenging trips positively affects your life in all sorts of ways. If you've missed it, I recently replayed a show I did on resilience and grit. I'll put a link in the show notes in case you missed it. It really is an important episode, and I do hope you'll take the time to listen. I have hiked all over the world and have seen some incredible landscapes. In fact, I've now hiked in all 7 continents. But I have got to say that Patagonia certainly ranks in the top. Like I said, it would make the top 3. It is absolutely stunning. If it is not on your list, you need to stop what you're doing and go at it right now. Our first day of hiking is an out and back. So on our way up to see the towers, we are surrounded by beauty that defies words. We have a crisp, clear day to hike and can see huge snow-capped mountains all around us. Up close, there are these magnificent fire bushes, which are rugged mountain shrubs covered this time of year in bright red honeysuckle-like flower clusters. It makes a striking contrast to the gray granite and white snow and the ice. Majestic is the word that comes to mind when I think of these mountains that just jut up from the valley plains, tectonic plates all crashing together. Karina explains the 3 kinds of rocks we'll see. Sedimentary, the kind that you can tell are like layers in a cake. Morphous, which change with pressure, I think she said. And volcanic. And you can really see the difference once you start paying attention. As we climb ever higher, we can now see the lakes down below. Lakes in impossible milky teal blues from the granite silt of the glacier melt. With the clear skies, we also get a great view of the towers, something that's not always a given. As we sit to enjoy our packed lunch overlooking the towers, our eyes settle on the rocks we're sitting on. Here and there are tiny cacti-looking clusters of some tough mothers. With this wind and the harsh climate, how can they possibly survive up here? While I can't say how the plants survive, I have come to believe that the guides survive off of mate. Mate is a tea-like substance from a plant that grows around 20 feet tall. You dry it and crush it like a tea, and then scoop what looks like a quarter cup of leaves into these small, often highly decorated gourds that fit in the palm of your hand. Pour boiling water over it to steep, and then you drink this bitter tasting, and it's definitely an acquired taste. You drink this bitter tasting infusion through a stainless steel decorated spoon straw. You stir it with the spoon, but there are holes in the straw handle of the spoon so you can sip the mate without getting leaves in your teeth. And it's a social drink. You would say, want to get together for a mate? The way I might say, hey, let's get together for a beer. Whoever makes the mate offers the straw and brew to his or her friends who all drink from the same straw. It keeps going around and around until you say thank you, which means you've had enough. The guides drink it constantly. Our hike to the top was a thoroughly satisfying hike, and we all did great. Thank you to Ken for speaking up. We are all delighted that you did. I was proud of us all and of our bodies. Denise picks up the nickname Grandma Badass. I think it's a fabulous name we should all give ourselves. Be Grandma or Grandma Badass from now on. Heading down to the Refugio was, of course, a lot easier than the climb up. The Refugio, which had dorm rooms of 4 to 6 with shared baths down the hall, is quite nice. There's a large dining area and people are assigned specific meal times. There's also an indoor seating area where you can chill out or eat and drink separately from the fixed menu. I believe you can buy food a la carte if you don't book the fixed breakfast and dinner. The prices for the Refugio meal was not cheap. I noticed from the posted sign. Obviously, ours was included in our trip. Also, outside are some picnic tables where you can enjoy the scenery with a beer or a soda that you can buy inside. Jody and I invite ourselves to join a gentleman we learn whose name is Jans at an outside table. Something funky is going on with Jody's phone, and Jans quickly fixes it for her. Jans is from the Netherlands and is hiking solo as his husband doesn't like this kind of adventure. He gives me the scoop on Buenos Aires, where I'll be spending the holidays. I love meeting people, especially hikers from around the world, as I can pick their brains about destinations and trails. In fact, our group is a treasure trove of insights like this as well, as we are a group of well-traveled folks. Much of our tour is spent exchanging travel stories and laughs. I love this as I can feel unself-conscious about telling travel stories without feeling like I'm bragging, since they're all just as well-traveled. When around family and friends who don't travel a lot, I tend to stay quiet as travel is not really one of their interests, and I don't want to bore them or seem like I'm bragging. So from other travelers, I often get new destination ideas to add to my ever-expanding list from these random chats. After dinner, we all crash and get rested for the next day. The W Trek gets its name from the rounded W shape of the trail, which resembles the double V-shaped lines that unite to form a W. We hike it from east to west, so on our second day, we will hike towards the center spur of the W. This second day of hiking the W Trek was easier than yesterday's, with only 8 miles and a little more than 1,300 foot of elevation gain. Today's highlight is the glacial Lake, I'm going to butcher this, Nordenskjold, and Sing Los Cuernos, the Horns, a granite peak that looks like a pair of horns. When we arrived at the refugio, there was some kind of a mix-up, and 3 of us would need to sleep in a tent. Denise raised her hand first, as being from Minnesota, she loves things cold. David also volunteered. After being assured I would be warm enough, I volunteered to be the third tenter. It turns out we campers drew the long straw, as the tents were quite sizable with nice pads and comfortable clean sleeping bags, and I'd brought my own liner. I had rented a sleeping bag from Active that I never needed to use. All the refugios included a sleeping bag or proper sheets. We were there early in the season when they were nice and fresh. If you're going later, you may want to rent the bag. Hans was appalled that I used theirs, but they looked and smelled good enough for me, especially since I had my own liner. I had also rented a liner from Active, but left that in Punta Arenas as my silk one was lighter weight. You can also rent poles if you don't want to pack them. And I should add, proper hiking boots are imperative on this tour. Also bring lots of layers, as you're going to be constantly adding and subtracting as the winds and the weather changes by the minute. Sometimes I was just 1 layer on, but on our last hike, I was cold and windy and it was a touch rainy, and I had 5 layers on when we were at the top. Of course, everything needs to be quick dry. Jans was at the refugio our second night as well, so we greeted each other like long-lost friends, shared a beer, and recounted the beautiful day's hike. He would be staying at different refugios than us for the rest of the hike, so we wished each other well for the rest of our adventures. I should mention that on our first day, since we were able to go to the refugio where we were staying at before our big hike, we could leave our sleeping bag and night junk there, meaning we only had to carry a day pack up the mountain. But from day 2 on, we had to carry everything we needed with us. One exception is that we could leave some of our junk at the closed refugio at the spur of the French Valley on the next day, on day 3, since we'd be passing by it again. So we would only have to carry our full pack part of that day's hike. Even though the refugio that we started our night stuff was closed, the rangers were still living there. They make $450 a month and get $4 a day for food. Karina said it costs about $10 a day to eat and suggested we offer up any of our leftovers to the rangers who poke their heads over the back fence to say hi. We get an abundance of food in our lunch pack each day, so they got a nice assortment of tasty protein bars, trail mix, and chocolate bars. As I jotted down my notes for this episode a couple weeks after our hike, I'm happy to report that the strike is over, although I don't know what kind of settlement they agreed upon. Our third day hiking in the French Valley is a Hall of Famer hike. You get a closer look at Los Cuernos, the horns, plus you get to see glaciers creeping down the granite peaks. At the end of the hike, I asked folks which was their favorite part of the W Trek, and most everyone agreed it was the French Valley. Again, we are blessed with clear weather, which makes surrounding the distant mountains and the ethereal lakes all the better. Sometimes we're in a forest, sometimes with glacial streams alongside, but often we're out, Julie Andrews-like, surrounded by peaks. We hear thunder in the distance. Yikes! Lightning is my biggest fear hiking, and certainly hiking up these tall granite peaks. But it's not thunder we're hearing, but rather avalanches. Where we hike, the snow is already melted, and avalanches are not a concern, so we just get to enjoy watching and listening to them instead. When you hear the quote-unquote thunder, look around, and if you're lucky, you get to see an avalanche on the mountain across the valley. We witnessed about a dozen of them, and I caught one on video, which I'll put on a video about the whole trip on the website. Be sure to check it out. I'll put a link in the show notes. Gratefully, while we were sitting around having lunch, we got to see several avalanches, which were quite cool. We also got to see condors. Condors, basically a large vulture with a better name, can have wingspans of 9 to 10 feet. They have a bit of red on their heads and some white under their wings when mature. During our lunch, we saw 4 juveniles riding the thermals, which was pretty cool. By the end of our trip, we'd seen dozens of condors and no longer paused to tell people, "Hey, look, look." It got like that with the guanacos and the rheas whenever we traveled by van. Those are the llama-looking things. Guanacos are cousins to the camel and look like its other cousin, the llama. They hang out usually in small herds on the pasture land. If there's a hill, one's going to be assigned lookout to warn about pumas. Guanacos are the favorite food of the puma. These guanacos are wild. They're also tasty, and you'll find them featured in stews and grilled throughout the region. We also saw a fair amount of rheas. These look like small ostriches, and it seemed like solo rheas hang out with the guanacos. I thought it interesting that once the female lays the egg, her job is done. The male is the one raising the chick. Rheas are protected in Chile, but they were introduced to Terra del Fuego in Argentina. Since they don't have pumas down here to keep the rheas under control, in Argentina they are hunted. Any rheas on the menu, therefore, come from Argentina. In addition to guanacos, rheas, and condors, we also saw plenty of fluffy desert fox and the biggest hares I've ever seen. These guys are easily 4 to 5 times larger than our bunnies. In the Patagonian Queen Hotel, somebody snapped a photo of a puma chasing a hare, and the hare was almost a quarter the size of the puma. They are that big, and I am not kidding. My theory is that they have to be big so they can tough out the harsh winters. At a museum I went to in Punta Arenas, they had taxidermied pelicans, storks, and other birds I was familiar with. All of them were at least 2 to 3 times larger than their cousins back home. One other surprising bird we saw a fair amount of was flamingos, although mostly in Argentina. I hadn't realized that some flamingos could take the cold. There are lagoons all over the place, and it's not uncommon to see what looks like pink buoys along the perimeter. Their heads are always down in the water seeking a snack, so all you usually see is pink flamingo butt. Overall, I was really pleasantly surprised at all the wildlife we saw. This was an unexpected treat. If I had to rate the places for wildlife that I've been to, Patagonia, Tanzania, and Antarctica would be my top 3, which tells you something. If I had to pick a wildlife place for the U.S., I would have to say Yellowstone. And Yellowstone reminds me of fires, and it reminds me of something else that I learned in Patagonia. Unlike the U.S. West, lightning strikes and forest fires are not part of the cycle of nature down here, so whenever there's a forest fire, it's devastating. One massive fire was caused by a careless tourist tossing a cigarette, another from a turned-over stove. The winds here are fierce, and they don't have the helicopters to scoop up the water to help them put it out, and it'd probably be too windy if they did have the helicopters. Thus, fires are strictly banned. We could still see evidence of fires a decade or more ago, which is sad. All the trees here seem to petrify rather than decompose, and I can't explain why. You'll see ancient dead trees just lying there. From where I come from, the forest would gobble them up in no time. Instead of fires, let's get back to the hike. As I look back on our tour, hiking the French Valley remains my favorite hiking day. It had the perfect mix of scenery and challenge with the excitement of seeing the avalanches. All in all, a most satisfying and beautiful day. Our 4th and final day of the W Trek, we hiked the second turn of the W towards our final spike up to Lake Gray. Lake Gray was what I was most excited for before our trip. I remembered all the pretty photos from when I covered Patagonia way back in episode 12. Again, I'll put a link in the show notes. At Lake Gray, we'd get to see Great Glacier and icebergs. I couldn't wait. Great Glacier is one of the most calving glaciers in the world. Calving is when a chunk of glacier breaks off, and I hope to see one. Great Glacier is tall, too, at over 650 feet high or around 200 meters. Definitely impressive. By lunchtime, when we eventually made it to our final refugio at the head of Lake Gray, like most adventures, it was not the destination, but the journey, as I was actually a bit sad that this part was over. What a beautiful hike. No wonder it is considered one of the prettiest treks in the world. As I mentioned, I put together a short video highlighting the best of my Patagonia adventure. You can check it out on the Active Travel Adventures website or on the Active Travel Adventures YouTube channel, but please do check it out. We're getting a little long, so I think I'll break this into a 2-part episode because we still have lots of adventures left to go in Patagonia. I hope you can hear my voice, how exciting this trip was, and I hope you sure will consider it. And if nothing else, please go to the website and check out the photos and videos that I put there for you. If you've enjoyed this episode, could I ask you a favor? Please share it on your social channels so others get to hear about it too. I would be most appreciative. Part 2 will be available for download immediately if you go to the website. Otherwise, you'll see it in 2 weeks when it comes out regularly on the podcast schedule. I really appreciate you listening. Until next time, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on!